Hey everybody, this is Kent from 214 Alpha. We're having a lot of really great conversations with communities as they prepare to use our software, and we find that a lot of them are doing a lot of the sort of fine-tuning of their own communities to prepare for this step. And so as a companion to our software, we actually have a process we're giving away for free. We call it the org model. I'm going to take you through it, just the first 4 steps actually. What org is actually stands for an organizational competency, which enables any group to structure themselves independent of any particular platform, right? And it's it's a recipe for launching to sustaining a self-sufficient community. The process itself is actually well informed by other communities that have followed this process. It begins with outrage and ends with stewardship, and I'll take you through each of the steps, but there's a implied progression through them. But this is predicated on a lot of different experience, a lot of experiences from other communities. The first step is outrage, and it's important to acknowledge this particular phase because the discomfort of outrage actually plays a really important role in inspiring change. Now, consider, given 2 stimuli, say outrage and discomfort and pleasure, right? Let's just say that those 2. Only the discomfort of outrage actually inspires change because pleasure tells you that what you're doing is working, right? And if you step back and you look on social media or you look anywhere else, it's filled with outrage. People are thoroughly dissatisfied. In fact, if you can get people to just talk about their outrage, if you can just talk about that and really drill in on their discomfort, you can actually transcend any of the artificial boundaries that are set up by politics or whatever else. Because everybody that is outraged believes that the system is ripe for optimization, right? And that's a beginning place. That's something that you can really break down the walls and build bridges, okay? You got to focus on building, though. You got to focus on a vision. And so this is the real emphasis of this step. Is that, and the reason I included it in the model is I've actually used a version of this in the past, and I made the mistake of not adding this as the first step. When people become frustrated with the progress or the pace of what's going on, they tend to revert back to the outrage. And it's important as a leader to steer them. You want to validate that. You want to be able to leverage that. It's sort of like if you're in a boat and you open up the sails and you want to leverage the wind to drive you forward. That's the outrage. You want to be able to do that, but you've got to steer them back towards a solution, okay? And so that's the really important part of this step. It's really just a sort of bookend to bring people back into the process. The second step is vision. That's a really important part because you are a change agent and not a victim. Most people that are complaining about how things are right now, it's coming from a place of feeling as if they don't have the power to affect change. That's actually not true here. You have the ability to affect change. And so that should take a lot of the hot air out of the emotion of being outraged. So the important part of the vision, the first part of the vision, is actually being able to distill it into a well-told joke, because you're going to need to convey this word like face to face. You got to be able to convey this to others, okay? And you'll see that next in the next phase, which is advocacy. But you've got to distill this thing down, and I actually have a recommended process for how to do that. It's the challenge, action, and result process. You can see the 3 major bullets there. And actually, where I learned this process is from writing resumes. You can do the same thing with resumes, by the way. You begin with a challenge, and then you talk about what action you took, what did you do, and then talk about the results. So let's use an example here. Let's say that there's we're not earning enough money to support our kids, which is true for a lot of us. And let's say that we sell extra things online. Let's say that we have resell clothing for children or toys or whatever. The problem is online sales have a lot of scammers and there's fraud. That's kind of a headache. And the transaction fees eat into the profits. And then if you want to create an example, you want to be able to quantify that, right? That's under challenge, okay? And this actually is an easy place for people to get if they're outraged, right? Because they have a pretty good way of articulating it. But you want to steer them towards the action plan. That's getting into the vision, right? That's this particular phase. And so what we propose is you could create a commerce platform that's exclusive to this community, just to use this example. And I should stress that this org process is not limited to our software, right? But just use as an example. The results is it saves 6% in fees for better profits, which is elaborated in another video entirely. You generate additional revenue, which gives more money, and there's a 95% reduction in fraud, better profits, okay? So challenge, action, result. And now you've got the basis of something you could deliver briefly in a conversation with a friend. Because as you can see here, I've actually literally taken those exact words from the last slide and put it into here. We're not earning enough money to support our kids. Online sales are beset by scammers, and online transaction fees are eating into our profits. Did you know that a community of 250 will spend almost $40,000 a year in transaction fees to Amazon and Visa? It's actually true. If you do 3 transactions a month and an average transaction size is $25, a community of 250 will spend $39,875 in transaction fees to Amazon and Visa. And you can see where this begins to make sense, this type of sort of solution. So our plan is to launch a commerce platform exclusive to us, to people who are selling, resell clothing and toys for children, right? This will result in better profits, more revenue, and a reduction in fraud. Now, look at this statement, because this is dramatically different than what was on the last slide. You know, the last slide might be characterized by outrage. We're outraged because we don't have enough money to pay the bills, and I really want to be able to buy my child a birthday present, right? And I'm really frustrated. In this case, this is a solution. We've completely changed the tone in just a couple of slides, right? So this gets us into advocacy, because now you're just skipped through the first 2 steps. You're right on the third step, the third phase of the org process. And it's all about building your team and bootstrapping your community governance model, which might seem a little counterintuitive, but bear with me and I'll explain why. The first thing we got to do with advocacy, we've got to infect others with a vision. But the emphasis is on others. You're not going to do this yourself, right? And I do want to stress that an idea achieves transcendence when it escapes the confines of a mind and embeds itself in the mind of another, right? You've got your idea, you pitch it to someone else, and it becomes their idea, and it spreads. This is, by the way, how to create a viral campaign, is to do it just like this. So you've got to enlist, you've got to create a core team. This is where you have to begin. You can't do this by yourself. And I know you might be capable of great quantities and volumes of work, but inevitably you get sick or something else happens, right? So just for purposes of continuity and to represent the community in a more holistic and representative way, you're going to need to create a basic team, right? So might I propose that you staff in this way, actually 3 personality types, if you will, and I call them the pace setter, the foundation, and the tiebreaker. You might notice that the logo of the company represents the 3 icons, the fire, leaf, and the water. The pace setter is someone like me, action-oriented and risk-taking, the kind of person that says, let's go out there and do it. And what I found in my own experience, I've been doing product development and I've been doing advocacy for decades. I found that I was able to improve my execution when I coupled my effort, when I teamed up with a foundation person, somebody who's a systems thinker and they're risk adverse. And it isn't because I like blockages or barriers. I actually find it to be super annoying. But if I can yield to the wisdom of the group between the pace setter and the foundation, chances are, more often than not, that the execution is actually better. I have some stories about that I won't elaborate on here, but if you would like, we can schedule a conversation. I can go into great detail about just exactly how this plays out. When I set up a team, the first person I staff is someone who is exactly the opposite of me, because I don't need help being action-oriented and risk-taking. In fact, the worst thing I can do is get someone just like me. So what I get is somebody who complements that, and that's the foundation. The third person is the tiebreaker, right? It's the water, right? So I've talked about the fire, I've talked about the leaf, the complement there, and now I've got the water. And it's a mix of both. It's actually a person who takes the initiative to introduce systems thinking and risk aversion, right? Plus reaches into adjacent circles for help. It ends up being a little mix of both. And those 3, that 3 working in concert ends up being a dramatic, high-functioning team. But nobody's in charge. The team is in charge. There's a real nuance to this, okay? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. This next thing here is you're defining roles and responsibilities. And if you haven't noticed, you're actually beginning to define your governance model, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to set up an organization. The first person is good at pursuing the vision. That's me, man. That's why I'm CEO of this company. But what I've got is the leaf, who's watching the flank, good at project management, accounting, that sort of thing. The kind of person that says, Kent, you might want to consider that this and this and this could happen if you do X, right? It helps with systems considerations. And the water is, keeping it fun, good at conflict resolution, negotiating needed resources, and networking. Again, as I talked about, that water resource will also reach into other circles to find other resources, okay? So this is an important consideration. Make it fun. It's got to be fun, right? Because this is not going to be easy, nor is it going to be fun all the time. In fact, chances are you're not going to get along more often than not. That is an inevitability. You've got to have the professional maturity to acknowledge that sometimes this isn't going to be very fun. But water is usually the people that you want to staff in that water place, actually everybody as far as that goes, but this competency is the type of person who uses humor to diffuse conflict because it's such a great way to diffuse it, okay? But it's also got to be fun. You've got to invest in making it fun or it'll be a slog in a hurry. So next thing is setting a baseline tempo. You've got your people. Let's say you've got 2 to 3 people. Now, you've got to start creating a tempo of execution, okay? And there's a really important thing I'm going to talk about here in a second, but you're not going to do it all in one bite. You're going to do this in a lot of little bites, okay? Bear with me on this. I really know execution. That's what I do well. So set up at the baseline tempo. So I recommend daily check-in meetings of about 15 minutes. In fact, we do what we call stand-ups. Every day, like clockwork, we check in for about 10, 15 minutes, and we say, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Are there any blockers? Just like that. And then about weekly, we do an all hands, and we talk about everything that we did, but it's only for 50, 60 minutes, okay? So that's, in fact, what you're getting a taste of here is just how much time commitment you'll get from your volunteers, because you're not asking for a lot more, okay? You gotta make this bite-sized for them. All right, so here's an important thing. Next thing you do is the strategy to execution plan. And I recommend the VSEM, which is borrowed from Cisco. Cisco's sort of the Microsoft of the networking world. But it works really well, and you can do this cheap. In fact, this plan that I put together, I wrote a blog post about it that's been included in a Master's of Sustaining Engineering program at University of Minnesota or something. I don't remember which one. But anyway, don't panic. It's actually pretty straightforward. Vision. This is the high-level thing, right? This is what you're going to do in 3 years. This is your 3-year vision. And so, ours will be the community moms think of when seeking to earn more money with buy, sell, trade, right? That's a good vision. The next one is strategy. We got to work on awareness. People don't even know who we are, so we're going to need to work on awareness. That's a strategy, which is reinforcing that particular vision. Next one is execution. We're going to write a white paper to let other people know our vision. So that execution task is in support of the strategy, which is in support of this vision. You follow where I'm going with this? And the metrics are tied to the execution, which is to show whether or not we were successful in our execution. We aspire to publish our edited and formally approved white paper by the end of September. Okay, that's a VSEM. I just shared with you how to do strategy to tactical execution in alignment. Okay, so in planning, don't cause burnout. It's really important here. Got to focus on shared artifacts. It's a really important consideration. And a good statement is, let's work on a white paper that describes our vision. The shared artifacts is a really important part of igniting the alchemy of that particular team that I talked about. Because you're going to get your super achievers, but it's got to be done in such a way that everybody that participates gets shared attribution. That really kicks off your team pride. It really kicks off the resilience of your team that'll continue to execute when things don't get fun. So really focus on a shared artifact. It doesn't mean that everybody gets credit even if they didn't help. There's some meritocracy in this. The other thing is that focus on small, discrete tasks, right? So you'll see me talk about this here on the next slide, but we got to focus on writing 1 chapter per 2-week sprint. I'll talk a little bit about sprints here in a moment. But don't overwhelm people, and this happens all the time, man. People say, I'm just going to go do this, and our market is 7 billion people. You're not going to do that in one step. You got to do this one little piece at a time, or you're going to lose people, okay? So what I've added to this is metrics, right? You got to make it actionable. So you got to set deadlines, okay? In my world, a plan without a deadline is a dream, right? You're not going to get it done. You got to set deadlines, man. And even if you miss it, at least you set a deadline, right? You got to be able to say, I'm going to do it by September. At least you'll start working towards it. There's a weird psychology at play. Most people don't spend hardly any time on something until the last day or so of a deadline, and they spend a lot of hours trying to get it done. It's weird and to me, but anyway, that's how it works. So this is the wisdom behind sprints that I talk about here in a second, but also define the success criteria. You got to emphasize the clear objectives and set the quality standards, right? And you'll see that in the metrics that are sitting there at the bottom. We aspire to publish our edited and formally approved white paper by the end of September, right? So if it sounds like I'm teaching you project management, because that's what I'm doing, right? This is what I've done for large corporations and small corporations and for nonprofits. This is how you get things done. So then you build your backlog. I recommend Jira. I know that there's probably lots of cheap or free ones out there. I'm not going to get into an endless discussion about which tool is better than others. I find that to be a waste of my time. I use Jira. It's $10 a month for 10 users, and it's easy as pie to use. So as you can see here, I've created a backlog for a project called Alchemy, and I have defined a variety of tasks. One of them is schedule daily stand-up meetings. Another one is set up Google Calendar, email, docs. Again, you might not like Google. That's fine. Use something else. I don't care. Create Project Alchemy in Jira. Schedule weekly all-hands meetings. Schedule bi-weekly sprint review meetings. Schedule draft white paper, which is the overview and the chapter outline. Schedule the draft white paper, chapter 1. Register the web domain and build the website. That's a sprint. Boom. 2-week sprint. As you can see, it runs from the 4th of August to the 18th of August, and those are stories that are defined. And I can do a totally other meeting that talks about how this works, but you're just looking at how to build a backlog. And these tasks are assigned to the people on your team, and as you update them, they're emailed, and it lets them know it's right into an email workflow. Off you go. So you can see that these tasks are discrete, bite-sized, and people can check them off when they're done, and it gives them a sense of completion, okay? This gets into the sprints, okay? So, as you saw on the last slide, the sprint lasts 2 weeks long. It really just forces you to have a regular release cadence. It becomes part of your culture. You cannot allow somebody to say, we're going to work for 6 months, we're going to release it. That person will destroy your team. You've got to be able to release on a consistent basis. I'm telling you, execution is my thing. You gotta release, even if it's not perfect. Make sure that you're always improving. That's the real key thing here. What I've got is, as you can see, I've got basically 4 fiscal quarters of the year 2020, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and I've got it broken into releases within that quarter, right? And so, I know this doesn't add up to 2 weeks, but just bear with me, right? So I've got version of the white paper, version of the white paper, version of the white paper, and then boom, white paper, right? We're updating. This is how you get things done, just one little bite at a time. But this is really important here. The regular release cadence gives your team a predictable stream of quick shared wins. That's a really important thing. Again, most of these people are going to be volunteering, and you cannot burn them out. You've got to be able to just off you go, right? And you got to make them like clockwork, release, because it's good for their morale. It's really, really great for morale. Also, it gets things done. At the end of each retrospective, you have an unsparingly honest one-on-one and team meetings to elicit assessments. The team has to be able to come back and say, that did not work as we thought it would. And then you have to emphasize, how would you improve it? You need to have a role in how to improve it, okay? And so we review the execution and the metrics and the strategic plan and make changes as we go. But this is a learning and continually growing organization where no one person is in charge. The team is participating in the feedback loops, okay? And that happens at the end of every release. And just like that, I just took you through advocacy. Those steps that I just shared with you helps you put together a team to take your vision, turn that into a message, and then start distributing it out there. And it's having it so it's not relying on one person, it's relying on a team, okay? So, and with funding, I'm only going to take you halfway through the funding one. And then the next video will pick up where I left off. But let me show you why it's important to do those last steps. This is a really important thing. It's a lot easier to secure funds if you did. Now, I ran a nonprofit, and then I spent 2 years on the board of the Tony Hawk Foundation. And if you don't know this, the Tony Hawk Foundation gives out grants, millions of dollars of grants every year for skateboard projects. And I learned from experience that if you don't do those first 3 steps, you're going to have a real headache trying to get some funding. And I'm going to show you exactly why here in a moment. The next thing is you're going to have a lot less conflict within the community if you actually invest in those steps, okay? So I'm going to show you why that's the case. So this part's actually pretty easy. Do you remember this slide, right? Because I said, look, you're sitting with your friend and you say, we're not earning enough money to support our kids. Online sales are beset by scammers. Online transaction fees are eating into our profits. A community of 250 people will spend almost $40,000 a year in transaction fees to Amazon and Visa. Our plan is to launch a commerce platform exclusive to us. This will result in better profits, more revenue, and reduction in fraud, right? You've already answered the why. The why is the most important thing to answer. When you're going to go and talk to people about money, you've got to have the why. And let me tell you a trick about money. The money is already there, okay? This is the really cool thing. The money that you're looking for is already there. The trick is that they intend to spend it elsewhere. So your job is actually pretty easy. You need to persuade them. You need to educate them that what you are providing is actually a better place to spend that money, okay? And I'm only going to do half the fundraising in this video. The next one gets into more detail on that. But this is the conversation. You're preparing for the ask. You're sitting with your friend, okay? Better profits, more revenue, and less fraud with our platform. And you are set up to ask the question, can you help? Can you volunteer some time? Can you contribute $50 to make this happen, okay? You're set up to do that because you've already answered all of those basic questions about why. And if you think about all the steps that you've done up until now, you've turned outrage into vision, you turned vision into advocacy, and in the advocacy you have a machine, you have a team that's able to help you execute, okay? And now you're at the point where you're going to ask. And in the next video, I'm going to break this into parts, okay? Because, let's say that what you're asking for is $75,000. Ain't nobody going to give you $75,000. But you might find 75 people willing to pay $1,000. Or you might find 150 people willing to pay $500. Do you follow what I'm doing? I'm breaking it into parts, which is what I'm going to begin in the next video that I do on this series. But for now, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to just invite you to contact us if you have any additional questions about how to apply this to your community or how we can help. You can go to 214alpha.com or see us on our Facebook page. Cheers.